Ready? Start. Honorable Chairman Sir, with regard to the question of coal in the new mineral policy, as I said, it will have its place in our new legislation. As my friend will understand, it is rather a difficult question. It covers matters such as mining, grading, marketing and utilization of inferior coal. It will require a good deal of cooperation of the owners of mines and all those who are in the trade in order that our legislation may be fruitful. I may assure the House that we propose to take the matter up as part of our post-war policy. I have said in a general way what the policy of the Government of India is. I would say in conclusion that an all-pervasive and dynamic mineral policy would depend upon three circumstances. It would depend upon the industrial drive in the country. If there is industrialization, this country will undoubtedly have to undertake a more vigorous mineral policy than it has done in the past. Whether our mineral policy will be successful and will be used for the benefit of the many will also depend upon two other considerations, namely the constitutional position, the distribution of authority between the states and the center, and the role the state is allowed to play in this matter. I believe I have said enough to enable the House to appreciate what the Government of India proposes to do in regard to a mineral policy for this country. In the course of the observation which Mr. Joshi made yesterday in support of his cut motion, he levelled certain charges against the Labour Department. At the conclusion, he not only stated that the Labour Department had failed in dealing adequately with the duties which are cast upon it to conserve and protect the interests of the workers, but he also ended by saying that the Labour Department did not have sympathy for the workers. Sir, the speech delivered by my honorable friend was delivered by him in a telegraphic fashion, omitting prepositions, participles, conjunctions and disjunctions, and certainly did not advance any detailed arguments in support of his conclusions, and I therefore feel at a certain disadvantage in dealing with his cut motion. However, I propose to do my best to meet his charges. Sir, the first charge that he levelled against the Labour Department was with respect to dearness allowance. His first accusation was that the dearness allowance granted by the Government of India was not adequate, and the second ground was that in the scheme of dearness allowance sanctioned by the Government of India, there was no kind of uniformity. With regard to the first part, I think Mr. Joshi will agree that the notions of adequacy must necessarily differ. It will be difficult to find two people who could agree on the exact quantitative measurement of what adequate dearness allowance would mean, and therefore I do not wish to enter upon that aspect of the case. However, I would like to tell the House that the Government of India has always been taking considerable interest in the matter of the dearness allowance and has been watching the situation, and it has taken steps in order to increase dearness allowance from time to time. We have not only increased dearness allowance, but we have also increased the higher limits of the workers who should be entitled to get dearness allowance. On the first occasion when dearness allowance was given, the highest limit fixed was 100 to 120. On the third occasion it was raised to 150, and on the fourth occasion it was raised to 250. I may tell the House that the Government of India is most actively considering the question of further increase in dearness allowance, and I hope and trust that before long the decision of the Government of India in this matter will be announced. With regard to the question of want of uniformity, I will readily admit that there is no uniformity, that different classes of employees of the Government of India are paid at different rates. But sir, I would like to ask who is responsible for this want of uniformity. I have no hesitation in saying that if anybody is responsible for the want of uniformity in dearness allowance, it is Mr. Joshi himself. What has happened in the matter of the grant of dearness allowance is this. You have got different sections in the labor world. You have got a body like the Railwaymen's Federation, a body like the Posts and Telegraph Union, like the Textile Union, and so on. And there are a lot of other people among the working classes who have practically next to no organization. I think Mr. Joshi will agree that the policy followed by most of these labor organizations is nothing else but a policy of organized loot in which the first man is trying to take whatever he can from the government of India, leaving the rest of the people uncared for. Here is the Railwaymen's Federation, which meets the Railway Board, uses its power politics and compels the Railway Board to grant the highest degree of dearness allowance. Then comes the Posts and Telegraph Union. They wait upon my honorable friend in charge of that department. They threaten him with strike. They tell him that they are the most essential part of the service to the country, and they eke out from him something which they think is best for themselves. The rest of the people have nobody to look after their cause, and I have not seen any move on the part of what are called the All India Trade Union Congress or the All India Labour Federation to come together and work out a policy which could be applied uniformly to all the working classes and to the men in the service of the government. Then Mr. Joshi referred to lack of attention to unemployment caused by involuntary circumstances. If I followed him correctly, he referred in somewhat contemptuous terms to the circular issued by the central government to the states and to the employers, telling them that it was the view of the government of India that whenever there was any involuntary unemployment due to shortage of coal or shortage of raw material, the employers should pay certain compensation to their employees. In our letter to the state governments, we had informed them that the government of India was prepared for a certain scale of payment to be made to the workers during this period of unemployment. We had told them that they should pay 75% of the ordinary rate of pay for the first fortnight, and for the second fortnight they should pay 50% of the wages. We also told them that the period for which this benefit was to be payable was 1 month and that the waiting period should be 7 months. Mr. Joshi ended by saying that the government of India had taken no further step in order to see that these benefits were actually made payable. Now, sir, I should like to point out that if Mr. Joshi had read the letter that we circulated to the state governments and to employers, he would have seen that we had also made some definite proposals with regard to meeting the cost of this involuntary unemployment. In the circular letter sent out, we had stated that the cost of these benefits paid to workmen for involuntary unemployment would be admissible as a revenue expenditure for income tax purposes. Obviously, then, if I may say so, this was a special clause in the letter and we did not think anything more was necessary. In addition to that, there is Rule 81A of the Defence of India rules, under which it is perfectly open to workers who have been thrown out of employment by reason of these circumstances to apply to the state governments for the purpose of submitting the issue to arbitration. I am glad to say that the matter is now being pursued in that direction. As honorable members are aware, there is a case of arbitration going on between the employers in Ahmedabad and the workers there on this issue. The third point which Mr. Joshi mentioned was connected with workmen's compensation. I was not able to get at exactly the grievance of his charge as to what was the deficiency in the position as it existed in this country and what exactly he wanted me to do. What I got from him was that he thought that compensation was not adequate. Now the House will recall that our definition of wages in the Workmen's Compensation Act is a very wide one. It not only includes money wages, but it also includes everything that is capable of being estimated in terms of money. From this, it will be clear that wherever there is a case of compensation to a workman, he is not only entitled to get compensation on the basis of his money wages, but he is also entitled to get compensation on his money wages and dearness allowance. Mr. Joshi mentioned the fact that while in Great Britain the law has been altered, we have done nothing of the kind in this country. He said that during the war, the benefits payable to workmen under the Workmen's Compensation Act in England have been enhanced. I have looked up the matter and the position, and I am sorry to say that Mr. Joshi has not really understood what the difference is. As honorable members of the House will be aware, in the English law, payments are periodical, while in India our payments are mostly lump sum payments.